Ophion was the first Titan god of Mount Olympus, a strange serpent-like creature which ruled the universe with his goddess wife Eurynomé. We might ask in present time where the spirit of horology abides most, certainly in haute horology in a special way, but as I've argued many times on this channel, in a special way in the micro-brand segment. Without a doubt, there are exciting micro-brand or microbrew sports watches out there, such as the diving watches from Halios or the automotive-inspired watches from Autodromo. But what about dress watches in the microbrew segment? What do we find there? Very little. So I'm very pleased today to present a best-of-breed micro-brand dress watch, the Ophion 960. The Ophion 960 is the brainchild of watch designer and entrepreneur Miguel Morales Ridas, who's based out of Spain. Though the Ophion 960 is of Spanish design, it features German construction in the case and dial and hands and crown, and a sophisticated Swiss movement. Let's talk through some of the details about the case and dial before we get to the movement, frankly because the movement's going to merit a lot of conversation and I don't want to miss on some of the outstanding details in this beautiful dial. Since the Ophion 960 is a watch that many people haven't heard of, let's take the time to walk through the specs. So this is a 42.9mm case, let's just say 43mm. It does feature 22mm lugs and is a relatively thin watch at 8.85mm thick at the thinnest point, and at the top of the dome crystal it's 10.35mm thick. Let's take some time to enjoy the subtle beauty of this dial, which, although it is quite simple, is also equally sophisticated. To me, the highlight of the dial is not just the 60s vibe, but the actual integration of what I might describe as modern architectural features in the dial. So let me explain. Obviously, the dial is domed in a very 1960s Omega style, as I pointed out, and the hands themselves are curved. But where the design really comes through strongly is in the applied indices. Notice the way that they rise at an equal distance despite the fact that the dial itself is curved downwards. It really gives a very strong structural feel to the application of those indices. You'll notice as well that there's lume applied on the hour and minute hands. And perhaps much more subtly, in the chapter ring, there's lume also applied on the indices at the 5-minute markers. In low light, this shows very elegantly and is almost reminiscent of skyscrapers slowly illuminating as the evening carries on. Although the dial is a typical example of re-envisioned 1960s minimalism, I would say the case has a little bit of Art Deco going for it, with the rich flowing curves on the sides and the large, highly polished bezel. The whole case is hand polished according to Ophion, which it's a little unclear to me how that would be done. I don't think that it's satin rubbed the way that you sometimes find in custom knives. At any rate, it has a very rich luster, which is also found on the crown, which the crown in and of itself seems to resonate with the rest of the stacked case and dial design. The dial is described as an anthracite gray, and it is definitely a medium gray that has a bit of sheen to it. On the website, it's described as a polished dial, which I wouldn't exactly describe it that way. It seems to have more of a clear coat on it. It's obviously a 1960s style, and while it's definitely more on the formal side, it isn't entirely formal thanks to two things, namely the printed logo and brand name, and then the non-applied printed markers going around the dial. This accomplishes a couple things. First of all, it makes the wide dial seem a little bit smaller and narrower. Your eye is drawn to the minute hand track there. Secondly, it gives the watch a little bit more sporty and versatile appearance, even though this is very clearly in the dress watch territory. All in all, the Ophion 960's dial has a lot going for it, and that's why I think it merits a close study. Not only does it have a nice balance of dress and sport sophistication with the combination of applied and printed markers, the actual architecture of the indices and hands and the interplay of that with the curved dial is really quite exceptional. But it is only so beautiful compared to the magnificent movement which is on the other side. The Ophion 960 features a Technotime TT 718 movement. This is a Swiss hand-winding movement with an astonishing 5-day or 120-hour power reserve. This is accomplished through the traditional and proven method of dual mainspring barrels in the movement. Essentially, you have twice the amount of power, or twice the amount of gas, maybe you would say, in your tank that allows this watch to run at a continuous rate for a longer period of time. This version of the TT718 features custom decoration which was done specifically at the specifications that Ophion arranged. In the pictured diagram, any one of the finishing features of this movement in a watch of this price range is noteworthy, but I would just like to comment on how nicely the beveling is accomplished in the two bridges and how deeply the blue is in all of the screws. This is often imitated in watches of this price range. The straight line finishing on the two bridges is impeccable, and it's cut away very purposefully to see the dual power reserves at work. This is, of course, a machine finish movement, and any movement at this price range will be machine finished. If this was hand finished, just add 2 zeros to the price tag. It was a little surprise to me, speaking to Miguel as I was preparing this review, to hear that a considerable amount of the 960's capital was dedicated to the procurement and development of this movement in this style of finishing. There's nothing like this available at this price range. Why is a movement like this desirable? Well, a big PR means that you're not going to have to be concerned about winding the watch on a regular basis. It's going to be an excellent watch to rotate in a collection. Why would you want a high-end but machine finish movement, but not an in-house movement? Well, basically because this is the most sophisticated kind of movements you're going to get at this price range, even when compared to an in-house movement that you might get from, say, Grand Seiko. This is a very sophisticated movement, regardless of who's making it. What about Technotime? Are they a legitimate Swiss movement maker? No doubt there's a lot of smoke and mirrors in the Swiss movement industry. Well, from what I was able to read, and I am an independent reviewer, so I just had to look into things myself, basically it looks like Technotime is proven. They have a very small staff, around 30 employees, and they only make about 12,000 movements a year. They are originally owned by a French holdings company, and now they're owned by a Hong Kong holdings company. But my understanding is that Technotime does all of the movement finishing through subcontractors in Switzerland. So definitely from a technical legal standpoint and from a probably more common sense standpoint, these are true Swiss movements, which are outliers in this relatively huge market, but nevertheless are proven with respect to the movements they have entered into competitions. One of the gossip on the forums about this movement is that it actually is made in China and finished in Switzerland, but I haven't found any basis for that. In fact, it seems to me that the only Chinese influence on this company is the holdings company. It has nothing to do with the manufacturing of the movement. All told, the Technotime TT 718 is a no-holds-barred, high-end manufactured movement that isn't available in any other watch at this price range. If you want a sophisticated manual winding movement that has a 5-day power reserve, you're going to have to go to the Ophion 960. The 960 comes on a real gator strap, which apparently is made in Spain, and I have to say that the quality of the strap and the sophistication of the gator leather easily compares to Omega gator straps that I previously owned. At a price of about $1,460, you would hope that the 960 comes with a nice kit as well, and I'm happy to report that it indeed does come with a great kit. So of course you have this signed wooden box with an impressive brass latch on it, and when you open it up, you see that the watch comes with a watch roll, which is a faux leather watch roll, as well as some basic paperwork, warranty, and direct contact information for Ophion. But the highlight for me is definitely the amazing blueprints. On thick wax semi-translucent paper, you get all of the CAD drawings of the Ophion, as well as a breakdown of a lot of the design themes. And it is just a joy to go through these. There are just so many little details that the average collector, and even someone who's looking at watches a lot like myself, just wouldn't catch if these sorts of things weren't included. This goes way beyond the kind of stuff you get from mainline Swiss manufacturers. You'll never get something this cool with a Rolex or with an Omega. This is definitely frame-worthy, and if this were my watch, I would definitely be framing this stuff and putting it up in a place where I could enjoy the drawings for the long term. Connoisseurship is a term that I hesitate to refer to a lot in this channel, mostly because I think it's laden with pretentiousness. But if you enjoy watches, this is truly a watch for the connoisseur. These blueprints are just for someone who's going to relish the details in a truly exceptional way. Alright, here's a shot of the watch on my wrist, and although I know the size will be a concern for some people, let me show you why it isn't a problem for me. First of all, notice how it easily fit under a sleeve. Second, notice how the lugs, which are straight lugs, basically still are within the parameters of my 7¼ inch wrist. Now, as I've talked about in previous videos, I really can't go much bigger than 44mm without the watch being really uncomfortable and huge. But especially in a watch this thin, and as you can see, it's quite thin, this watch actually wears pretty small for a 43mm watch. Here are a couple more dress watches in my collection just as a reference. The Orient Bambino version 3 is 40mm, and the Omega, which is of course vintage, is 34mm. Really, the transition is fairly gradual, and I can comfortably wear all three of these watches, although, like I've often said, my sweet spot's right around 40mm. As far as alternatives to consider goes, I would say I would definitely look at an older Omega coaxial from the Aquaterra line, such as one shown here. The only microbrew watch at this price range is the Chris Ward Harrison, which has its own special high power reserve movement, and it's a beautiful looking watch with an automatic movement. Very interesting watch to consider, and one I hope to review eventually. Now, I prefer not to give my watches and gear problematic grades or ratings, but if I was going to give this watch a grade, it would definitely have to be an A. This is a watch for the pure enthusiast. It challenges the status quo of quote-unquote luxury dress watches. Its labor of love design clearly shows, and is backed up by a spared no expense, top shelf movement. When I got this watch in for review, I wasn't convinced that the specs on paper, which are very impressive, would be met by an equally impressive watch in the flesh, but it certainly is, and is one I'm definitely considering adding to my collection. Make sure to let me know what you think of this watch in the comments below. Do you think what it represents is a threat to more mainline watches in the industry? I'd love to have a discussion about the potential future of these micro-brand watches with sophisticated movements. As always, I really appreciate you watching. Thanks a lot for your time.